So the next lesson we're going to do a defocus of this CG car with the Z depth pass. So the Z depth pass, like I mentioned before, we can actually use it for fog and color grading and stuff like that. But the other thing we can use it for is defocusing our CG, like a camera lens defocus. So we can see here that, let's get a roto paint node. Alright, so yeah, we can see here that all of this stuff is out of focus. We can see these are called bokehs. So when you really unfocus something, you get these little glints of these kind of glinting circles, or sometimes they're not circle, depending on the lens, but they're called bokehs. So we can see that's really out of focus back there. But what we start to see is that it starts to fall out of focus right about here. So it's sharp here, and then it's falling out of focus. And this is what we're referring to when we call the term depth of field. And it's really kind of a field. So if I were to draw this, we have our in focus area here, and I could cut it like this, and it's kind of this area that's in focus. And beyond that, it starts to fall a bit out of focus and out of focus. And so this field can actually be shifted depending on the lens. So you can shift that field around and move it. So it also depends, so the width of this field, so this green area that we're looking at, look at the green again. So this green area, depending on the lens and the aperture of the lens. The aperture is the iris on the lens, how wide it is. This field can be wider or thinner. So that's all good to know. So this is just photography basics. If you don't know a lot about photography, I would really suggest you guys pick up a photography book just to learn some of those core concepts about depth of field and aperture and stuff like that. But what the point we're trying to get here is, with that Z depth pass, that distance pass, we can fade our defocus from more to less. So we need to blend the front of this car, which is much too sharp, with the area behind, which is pretty soft. If we look at that edge there, we can see it's kind of fading off. I don't know if it's about 10 pixels or so, and this is, basically 1 pixel. So we need to blur that car. So what we're going to do is create a Z defocus node after the pre-multiplication on our car layer. All right, so we can see something's happening and it's going out of focus. We start to see some bokehs and stuff like that. But what we need to do is, just before the defocus, just view it quickly and look at the depth pass. And try to sample where that car was and kind of scroll your mouse across distance. And what you'll notice if you watch here, as I scroll further away, we see we start at 500, and then if I start to scroll back, it goes further away. So at the very front of the car seems to be about 638, and the back of the car seems to be 540 or so. So we know that the further away the information is, the higher the number is. So in our settings of defocus here, we have a lot of different settings. We know far is not going to be 0 because that number is increasing. The further away it is, the number is higher. So by default, we can usually just set depth for the math of this. So why there's a different math setting here is because depending on where you're getting your render, if it's from Blender, Maya, different rendering things, Redshift, depends what you're rendering out of, and sometimes this math can be different. So it's good to know about the math of your depth pass. But ours seems to be lower in the close and higher the further it gets away. So we're going to set the depth. And we'll just switch it back. And now we can take this focal point and shift it around onto our CG. And you can see that this focus plane number is changing as we slide it along the surface, which is what we want. So just take a look at the Z defocus here. And I'm going to switch the output to focal plane setup. So now we can actually see this concept I was drawing out before. And what we want to do is increase the depth of field so that this car is mostly in focus towards the back and fading off out of focus in front, because that's kind of how our camera is. So we can increase this depth of field here, and that's what we're going to do. So I can do it here and then switch it back to result and zoom in, and we can just enable and disable just to see if anything's happening. So what we need to do is increase our size and our maximum size. So I'm going to increase the maximum, and then I'm going to increase the size and re-enable that. Alright, so keep increasing there. So we can see it's starting to work. And I think it's falling off just a little bit too fast, so I'm going to decrease that depth of field. So it's a little bit more inside the wheel. So let's see, that's probably a bit too blurry, but let's just check. Alright, so we can see we're starting to fade that car off into depth. And I think it's actually pretty close. Maybe it's a little bit much. So we can decrease the size. So if you decrease that to 0, the effect will be none. But we'll keep it at about 20. So that's just a subtle effect, but it makes a big difference with integrating something into the real world to have that. I'm just looking at this to see how far it goes. Yeah, so that should work. We are having some issues here on our on our edge here. Let's just see if we can switch that to, it could be our, let me just double check here. If we switched it to far 1, that's also another type of math you can use. It depends what render engine you're also getting this out of, so I'm going to delete that. I think it's correct to set it to depth. It depends what render engine you're getting out of, so sometimes you have to play around with this and double check to make sure you're using the right setting. So we're having that issue on the edge, which means, let's just try something here. Yeah, so we might have to actually mask off this effect. So Z-defocus is not always perfect. It's a little bit hacky with how it works. So what we can do is actually we can mask that off. So if we're having a problem just in this area and maybe a little bit here, we can of course mask this. So we don't want the defocus going on the edge and around this area, because that's all supposed to be in focus. We really just want it to be isolated towards the front of this car. So I'm just going to take a rotoshape and just quickly kind of chop off this whole area, just so that we don't have that being negatively affected. And alright, so, and what we'll need to do is take the mask and invert it. And so now we just have that effect going on the front of the car. I'm just going to blur the roto as well, just so we don't have any problems near that edge. Alright, cool. So we should be good. And what we can do is quickly just animate this roto across our shot. So I'm just going to go to the end frame. I'm going to set it there. Make sure that it's not sliding around. Just keeping on the edge of our vehicle there. So this is the problem with Z-defocus, is things that overlap can be problematic with post-production defocus. So ideally, if you have a problem situation like this where there's something sharp in front of something out of focus, this is where the Z-defocus can kind of break down sometimes. There are more advanced tools that can fix this problem, but it's basically deep compositing, but we're not going to go over that in this lesson because that's pretty advanced stuff. Alternatively, you can actually render your render with this defocus, which would solve the problem as well. But this will work for now because we don't have a crazy amount of overlap. So I'm just going to finish this up here and just make sure. All right, so that's good. So now we have front of the car out of focus, and it's not breaking any of our edges. Yep, so that is good for our Z defocus.